Bleak House by Charles Dickens, Chapter 55, Flight. Inspector Bucket of the detective has not yet struck his great blow, but his great blow is just now chronicled, but is yet refreshing himself with sleep preparatory to his field day when, through the night and along the freezing wintry roads, a chaise and a pair comes out of Lincolnshire, making its way toward London. Mrs. Rouncewell, so many years housekeeper at Chesney Wold, sits within the chaise, and by her side sits Mrs. Bagnet, with her grey cloak and umbrella. The old lady cannot make enough of the old girl. She sits in her stately manner, holding her hand, and regardless of its roughness, puts it often to her lips. "You are a mother, my dear soul," says she many times. "And you found out my George's mother?" "Why, George," returns Mrs. Bagnet, "was always free with me, ma'am. And when he said at our house to my Woolwich that of all the things my Woolwich could have done to think that of all the things my Woolwich could have to think of when he grew to be a man, the comfortablest would be that he had never brought the sorrowful life into his mother's face, I turned a hair of her head grey. Then I felt sure, from his way, that something fresh had brought his own mother into his mind. I have often known him to say to me in past times that he had behaved bad to her." "Never, my dear," returns Mrs. Rouncewell, bursting into tears. "My blessing on him, never. He was always fond of me and loving to me, was my George, but he had a bold spirit, and he ran a little wild and went for a soldier, and I know he waited at first in letting us know about himself till he should rise to be an officer, and when he didn't rise, I knew he considered himself beneath us and wouldn't be a disgrace to us, for he had a lion heart, had my George, always from a baby." Mrs. Bagnet, with the instinctive skill of a good warm heart, leaves the old housekeeper to her emotions for a little while, not without passing the back of her hand across her own motherly eyes, and presently chirps up in her cheery manner. "So I says to George, when I goes to call him in to tea, 'What ails you this afternoon, George, for gracious sake? I've seen all sorts, and I have seen you pretty often, in season and out of season, abroad and at home, and I never seen you so melancholy penitent.' 'Why, Mrs. Bagnet,' says George, 'it's because I am melancholy and penitent both this afternoon that you see me so. What have you done, old fellow?' says I. 'Why, Mrs. Bagnet,' says George, shaking his head, 'what I have done has been done this many a long year, and is best not tried to be undone now. If I ever get to heaven, it won't be for being a good son to a widowed mother, I say no more.' Then George tells me that he has seen by chance at the lawyer's office a fine old lady that has brought his mother plain before him, and he runs on about that old lady till he quite forgets himself, and paints her picture to me as she used to be, years upon years back. So I says to George, when he has done, 'Who is this old lady he has seen?' And George tells me it's Mrs. Rouncewell, housekeeper for more than half a century to the Dedlock family down at Chesney Wold in Lincolnshire. George has frequently told me before that he's a Lincolnshire man, and I says to my old Lingham that night, 'Lingham, that's his mother for £45. "'Bless you and thank you,' says Mrs. Rouncewell. 'Bless you and thank you, my worthy soul.' "'Dear heart,' cries Mrs. Bagnet, in the most natural manner. 'No thanks to me, I am sure. Thanks to yourself, ma'am, for being so ready to pay him. And mind once more, ma'am, what you had best do on finding George to be your own son is to make him, for your sake, have every sort of help to put himself in the right, and clear himself of a charge of which he is innocent, as you or me. It won't do to have truth and justice on his side. He must have law and lawyers,' exclaims the old girl, apparently persuaded that the latter from a separate establishment and have dissolved partnership with truth, that the latter form a separate establishment and have dissolved partnership with truth and justice forever and a day. "He shall have," says Mrs. Rouncewell, "all the help that he can be got for him in the world, my dear. I will spend all I have, and thankfully, to procure it. Sir Leicester will do his best. The whole family will do their best. I know something, my dear, and will make my own appeal, as his mother, parted from him all these years, and finding him in a jail at last. Mrs. Bagnet wonders why Mrs. Rouncewell should murmur so distractedly, "My lady, my lady, my lady," over and over again. The frosty night wears away, and the dawn breaks, and the post-chaise comes, rolling on through the early mist, like the ghost of a chaise departed. London reached, the travellers alight, the old housekeeper in great tribulation and confusion, Mrs. Bagnet quite fresh and collected. But when they set out for the prison where the trooper is confined, the old lady has managed to draw about her, with her lavender-coloured dress, much of the staid calmness which is its usual accompaniment. A wonderfully grave, precise, and handsome piece of old china she looks, though her heart beats fast. Approaching the cell, they find the door opening, and a warder in the act of coming out. The old girl promptly makes a sign of entreaty to him to say nothing. Assenting with a nod, he suffers them enter as he shuts the door. So George, who is writing at his table, supposing himself to be alone, does not raise his eyes, but remains absorbed. The old housekeeper looks at him, and those wandering hands of hers are quite enough for Mrs. Bagnet's confirmation, even if she could see the mother and son together, knowing what she knows, and doubt their relationship. Not a rustle of the housekeeper's dress, not a gesture, not a word betrays her. She stands looking at him as he writes on, all unconscious, and only her fluttering hands give utterance to her emotions. But they are very eloquent, very, very eloquent. Mrs. Bagnet understands them. They speak of gratitude, of joy, of hope, of inextinguishable affection, cherished with no return since this stalwart man was a stripling, of a better son loved less, and this son loved so fondly and so proudly. "George Rouncewell, oh, my dear child, turn and look at me." The trooper starts up, clasps his mother round the neck, and falls down on his knees before her. Whatever in a late repentance, whatever in the first association that comes back upon him, he puts his hands together as a child does when it says its prayers, and raising them toward her breast, bows down his head and cries, "My George, my dearest son, always my favourite, and my favourite still, where have you been these cruel years and years? Grown such a man, too, grown such a fine, strong man, grown so like what I knew he must be if it pleased God he was alive." She can ask, and he can answer, nothing connected for a time. "Mother," says the trooper when they are more composed, "forgive me, first of all, for I know my need of it." Forgive him! She does it with all her heart and soul. She always has done it. She tells him how she has had it written in her will these many years that he was her beloved son George. She has never believed any ill of him, never, and if she had died without his happiness, and she is an old woman now, and can't look to live very long, she would have blessed him with her last breath if she had had her senses, as her beloved son George. "Mother, I have been an undutiful trouble to you, and I have my reward. But of late years I have had a kind of glimmering of a purpose in me too. When I left home, I didn't care much, Mother, I am afraid, not a great deal for leaving, and I went away, enlisted harum-scarum, making believe to think that I cared for nobody. No, not I, and that nobody cared for me. So I wrote a line home, Mother, as you too well know, to say I had listed under another name, and I went abroad. Abroad at one time, I thought I would write home next year, when I might be better off, and when that year was out, I thought I would write home next year, when I might be better off, and when that year was out again, perhaps, I didn't think much about it. So on from year to year, through a service of 10 years, till I began to get older, and to ask myself why I should ever write. I don't find you any fault, child, but not to the ease of my mind, George. Not a word, dear loving mother, who is growing older too." This almost overturns the trooper afresh, but he sets himself up with a great rough-sounding clearance of his throat. "Heaven forgive me, Mother, but I thought there would be small consolation then in hearing anything about me. There were you, respected and esteemed. There was my brother, as I read in chance North Country papers now and then. rising to be prosperous and famous. There was I, a dragoon, roving, unsettled, not self-made like him, but self-unmade, all my earlier advantages thrown away, all my little learning unlearnt, nothing picked up but what unfitted me for most things that I could think of. What business had I to make myself known? After letting all that time go by me, what good could come of it? The worst was past with you, mother. I knew by that time, being a man, how you had mourned for me and wept for me and prayed for me, and the pain was over, or was softened down, and I was better in your mind as it was. The old lady sorrowfully shakes her head, and taking one of his powerful hands, lays it lovingly upon her shoulder. No, I don't say that it was so, mother, but that I made it out to be so. I said just now, what good could come of it? Well, my dear mother, some good might have come of it to myself, and there was the madness of it. You would have sought me out. You would have purchased my discharge. You would have taken me down to Chesney Wold. You would have brought me and my brother's family together, and would have considered anxiously how to do something for me, and set me up as a respectable civilian. But how could any of you feel sure of me, when I wouldn't so much as feel sure of myself? How could I look at my brother's children in the face? How could I look my brother's children in the face and pretend to set them an example? I, the vagabond boy who had run away from home, and been a grief and unhappiness in my mother's life. No, George, such were my words, mother, when I passed in this review before me. You have made your bed, now lie upon it. Mrs. Rouncewell, drawing up her stately form, shakes her head at the old girl, with a swelling pride upon her, as much to say, I told you so. This was the way I brought myself to think, mother, that my best amends was to lie upon that bed that I had made, and die upon it. And I should have done so, though I have been to see you more than once down at Chesney Wold, when you thought little of me. But for my old comrade's wife here, who I find has been too many for me, but I thank her for it. I thank you for it, Mrs. Bagnet, with all my heart and might. And now the old lady impresses upon her son George, her own dear recovered boy, her joy and pride, the light of her eyes, the happy close of her life, and every fond name she can think of, that he must be governed by the best advice obtainable by money and influence, that he must yield up his case to the greatest lawyers that can be got, that he must act in the serious plight as he shall be advised to act, and must not be self-willed, however right, but must promise to think only of his poor old mother's anxiety and suffering until he is released, or he will break her heart. Mother, 'tis little enough to consent to, returns the trooper. Tell me what I shall do, and I'll make a late beginning and do it. Mrs. Bagnet, if you'll take care of my mother... Mrs. Bagnet, you'll take care of my mother, I know. If you'll bring her acquainted with Mr. Jarndyce and Miss Summerson, she will find them of her way of thinking, and they will give her the best advice and assistance. And George, says the old lady, we must send with all haste for your brother. He is a sensible, sound man, as they tell me, and will be of great service. Mother, returns the trooper, is it too soon to ask a favour? Surely not, my dear. Then grant me what this great favour. Don't let my brother know. Not know what, my dear? Not know of me. In fact, mother, I can't bear it. I can't make up my mind to it. He has proved himself so different from me, and has done so much to raise himself while I've been soldiering, that I haven't brass enough in my composition to see him in this place and under this charge. How could a man like him be expected to have any pleasure in such a discovery? It's impossible. No, keep my secret from him, mother. Keep my secret from my brother of all men. But not always, dear George? Why, mother, perhaps not for good and all, though I may come to ask that too. But keep it now, I do entreat you. If it's ever broke to him that his rip of a brother has turned up, I could wish, says the trooper, shaking his head very doubtfully, to break it myself and be governed by the way in which he seems to take it, as he evidently has a rooted feeling on this point, and as the depths of it recognized in Mrs. Bagnet's face, his mother yields her implicit assent to what he asks. For this he thanks her kindly.
In all other aspects, my dear mother, I'll be as traceable and obedient as you can wish. On this one alone I stand out. So now I am ready even for the lawyers. I have been drawing up an exact account of what I know of the deceased and how I came to be involved in this unfortunate affair. It's entered plain and regular, like an orderly book, not a word in it but what's wanted for the facts. I did intend to read it straight on end, whensoever I was called upon to say anything in my defence. I hope I may be let to do it still, but I have no longer a will of my own in this case, and whatever is said or done, I give my promise not to have any. Matters being brought to this so far satisfactory pass, and time being on the wane, Mrs. Bagnet proposes a departure. Again and again the old lady hangs upon her son's neck, and again the trooper holds her to his broad chest. Where are you going to take my mother, Mrs. Bagnet? I'm going to the town house, my dear, the family house. I have some business there that must be looked to directly, Mrs. Rouncewell answers. Will you see my mother safe there in a coach, Mrs. Bagnet? But of course I know you will. Why should I ask it? Why indeed, Mrs. Bagnet? Why indeed, Mrs. Bagnet expresses with the umbrella. Take her, my old friend, and take my gratitude along with you. Kisses to Quebec and Malta. Love to my godson, a hearty shake of the hand to Lignum, and this for yourself. And I wish it was £10,000 in gold, my dear. So saying, the trooper puts his lips to the old girl's tanned forehead, and the door shuts upon him in his cell. No entreaties on the part of the good housekeeper will induce Mrs. Bagnet to retain the coach for her own conveyance home. Jumping out cheerfully at the door of the Dedlock mansion, and handing Mrs. Rouncewell up the steps, the old girl shakes hands and trudges off, arriving soon afterwards in the bosom of the Bagnet family, and falling to washing the greens as if nothing had happened. My lady is in that room in which she held her last conference with the murdered man, and is sitting where she sat that night, and is looking at the spot where he stood upon the hearth, studying her so leisurely, when a tap comes at the door. Who is it? Mrs. Rouncewell. What has brought Mrs. Rouncewell to town so unexpectedly? Trouble, my lady, sad trouble. Oh, lady, my lady, I beg a word with you. What new occurrence is it that makes this tranquil old woman tremble so, far happier than her lady, as her lady has often thought? Why does she falter in this manner, and look at her with such strange mistrust? What is the matter? Sit down and take your breath. Oh, lady, my lady, I have found my son, my youngest, who went away for a soldier so long ago, and he is in prison, charged with a murder, my lady, of which he is innocent, as I am, accused of the murder of Mr. Tulkinghorn. What does she mean by this look and this imploring gesture? Why does she come so close? What is the letter that she holds? Lady Dedlock, my dear lady, my good lady, my kind lady, you have been a heart to feel for me. You must have a heart to forgive me. I was in this family before you were born. I am devoted to it. But think of my son wrongfully accused. I do not accuse him. No, my lady, no, but others do. And he is in prison and in danger. Oh, Lady Dedlock, if you can say but a word to help clear him, say it. What powers does she suppose is in the person she petitions to avert this unjust suspicion? If it be unjust, her lady's handsome eyes regard her with astonishment, almost with fear. My lady, I came away last night from Chesney Wold to find my son in my old age, and the step upon the ghost walk was so constant and so solemn, I never heard the like in all these years. Night after night, as it has fallen dark, the sound has echoed through your rooms. But last night it was awfulest, and as it fell dark last night, my lady, I got this letter. What letter is it? Hush, hush! The housekeeper looks round. The answers in a frightened whisper. My lady, I have not breathed a word of it. I don't believe what's written in it. I know it can't be true, but my son is in danger, and you must have a heart and pity me. If you know of anything that is not known to others, if you have any suspicions, if you have any clues at all, and any reason for keeping it in your own breast, oh, my dear lady, think of me and conquer that reason, and let it be known. I know you are not a hard lady, But you go your own way, always without help, and you are not familiar with your friends and all who admire you, and all do as a beautiful and elegant lady know you to be one far away from themselves, who can't be approached close. My lady, you have some proud or angry reason for disdaining to utter something that you know. If so, pray, oh pray, think of a faithful servant whose whole life has been passed in this family, which she dearly loves, and relent and help to clear my son. My lady, my good lady, I am so humble in my place, and you are by nature so high and distant that you must not think what I feel for my child, but I feel so much that I have come here to make so bold as to beg and pray you not to be scornful of us, if you can do us any right or justice at this fearful time. Lady Dedlock raises her without one word until she takes the letter from her hand. Am I to read this? When I am gone, my lady, if you please, and then remember the most that I consider possible. I know of nothing I can do. I know of nothing I reserve that can affect your son. I have never accused him. My lady, you may pity him the more under a false accusation after reading the letter. The old housekeeper leaves her with the letter in her hand. She opens the letter. Spread out upon the paper is a printed account of the discovery of the body as it lay face downward on the floor, shot through the heart, and underneath is written her own name with the word murderess attached. It falls out of her hand. It lies where it fell when a servant stands before her announcing the young man of the name of Guppy. The words have probably been repeated several times, for they are ringing in her head before she begins to understand them. Let him come in. He comes in, holding the letter in her hand, which she has taken from the floor. She tries to collect her thoughts. In the eyes of Mr. Guppy, she is the same Lady Dedlock, holding the same prepared, proud, chilling stare. Your ladyship may not be at first disposed to excuse this visit from one who has never been welcome to your ladyship, which he don't complain of, for he is bound to confess that there never has been any particular reason in the face of things why he should be, but I hope when I mention my motives to your ladyship you will not find fault with me, says Mr. Guppy. Do so. Thank your ladyship. I ought first to explain to your ladyship. Mr. Guppy sits on the edge of a chair and puts his hat on the carpet at his feet, that Miss Summerson, whose image, as I formerly mentioned to your ladyship, was at one period of my life imprinted on my art until erased by circumstances over which I had no control, communicated to me, after I had the pleasure of waiting on your ladyship last, that she particularly wished me to take no steps whatever in any manner at all relating to her, and Miss Summerson wishes, being to me a law, I consequently never expected to have the distinguished honour of waiting on your ladyship again, and yet I am here now, my object being to communicate to your ladyship under the seal of confidence why I am here. He cannot do so, she tells him, too plainly or too briefly. Nor can I, Mr. Guppy returns with a sense of injury upon him, too particularly request your ladyship to take a particular notice that I have no interested views of my own to serve in coming here, if it were not for my promise to Miss Summerson, and my keeping of it sacred. I shouldn't have darkened these doors again. Your ladyship will remember, when I mention it, that the last time I was here I run against a party very eminent in our profession, and whose loss we all deplore. That party certainly did from that time apply himself to cutting in against me in a way that I will call sharp practice, and did make it at every turn and point extremely difficult for me to be sure that I hadn't inadvertently led up to something contrary to Miss Summerson's wishes. Lady Dedlock looks at him in stern inquiry. Mr. Guppy immediately withdraws his eyes from her face and looks anywhere else. Indeed, it has been made hard, he goes on, to have any idea what the party was up to, that until the loss which we all deplore, I was gravelled, an expression which your ladyship, moving in the higher circles, will be so good as to consider tantamount to knocked over. However, what with the exertion of my humble abilities, and what with the help of a mutual friend by the name of Mr. Tony Weevil, who is of a high aristocratic turn, and has your ladyship's portrait always hanging up in his room, I have now reasons for an apprehension as to which I come to put your ladyship upon your guard. First, will your ladyship allow me to ask you whether you have had any strange visitors this morning? I don't mean fashionable visitors, but strange visitors, for instance, as Miss Barbary's old servant, or as a person without the use of her lower extremities carried upstairs similar to a guy. No! Then I assure your ladyship that such visitors have been here, and have been received here, because I saw them. What have I to do with that? Or what have you? I do not understand you. What do you mean? Your ladyship, I come to put you on your guard. There may be no occasion for it. Very well, then. I have only done my best to keep my promise to Miss Summerson. I strongly suspect that those letters I was to have brought to your ladyship were not destroyed when I supposed they were. That if there was anything to be blown upon, it is blown upon. That the visitors I have alluded to have been here this morning to make money of it, and that the money is made, or making. Mr. Guppy picks up his hat and rises. Your ladyship, you know best whether there's anything in what I say, or whether there's nothing. Something or nothing. I have acted up to Miss Summerson's wishes in letting things alone, and in undoing what I had begun to do, as far as possible. That's sufficient for me. I now take my farewell of your ladyship, and assure you that there's no danger of your ever being waited on by me again. She scarcely acknowledges these parting words by any look, but when he has been gone a little while, she rings her bell. Where is Sir Leicester? Mercury reports that he is at present shut up in the library alone. Has Sir Leicester had any visitors this morning? Several on business. Mercury proceeds to a description of them, which has been anticipated by Mr. Guppy. Enough, he may go. So, all is broken down. Her name is in these many mouths. Her husband knows his wrongs. Her shame will be published, maybe spreading while she thinks about it. And in addition to the thunderbolt so long foreseen by her, so unforeseen by him, she is denounced by an invisible accuser as the murderess of her enemy. Her enemy he was, and she has often wished him dead. Her enemy he is, even in his grave. This dreadful accusation comes upon her like a new torment at his lifeless hand, and when she recalls how she was scarcely at his door that night, and how she may be represented to have sent her favorite girl away so soon before merely to release herself from observation, she shudders as if the hangman's hands were at her neck. She has thrown herself upon the floor and lies with her hair all wildly scattered and her face buried in the cushions of a couch. She rises up, hurries to and fro, flings herself down again, and rocks and moans. The horror that is upon her is unutterable. It is unutterable. If she were really the murderess, it could hardly be more intense. A terrible impression steals upon and overshadows her, that from this pursuer, living or dead, obdurate and impenetrable before her, in his well-remembered shape, or not more obdurate and impenetrable in his coffin bed, there is no escape but in death. Hunted she flies. The complication of her shame, her dread, remorse, and misery overwhelms her at its height, and even her strength or self-reliance is overturned and whirled away like a leaf before a mighty wind. She hurriedly addresses these lines to her husband, seals and leaves them on her table. If I am sought for or accused of his murder, believe that I am wholly innocent. Believe no other good of me, for I am innocent of nothing else that you have heard or will hear laid upon my charge. He prepared me on that fatal night for his disclosure of my guilt to you. After he left me, I went out on pretense of walking in the garden, where I sometimes walk, but really to follow him and make one last petition that he would not protract the dreadful suspense on which I have been racked by him. You do not know how long, but would mercifully strike next morning. I found his house dark and silent. I rang twice at his door, but there was no reply, and I came home. I have no home left. I will encumber you no more. May you, in your just resentment, be able to forget the unworthy woman on whom you have wasted a most generous devotion, who avoids you only with a deeper shame than that which she hurries from herself, and who writes his last adieu. She dresses quickly, leaves her jewels and her money, listens, goes downstairs when the hall is empty, opens and shuts the great door, flutters away in the shrill, frosty wind. And that is the end of chapter 55.